ignorance and also hungry. I never meet people who are so complacent. I can get them to do anything I want. That's why nothing ever come out those rape accusations. They don't want no one else to run this nation. Anytime they decide to make the changes that are necessary, a leader like me would have get kicked out the own party.
Oh, NDP, we love you so. One family, one destiny. We strive for what is right, and raising in God's sight, and a democratic life. We believe our country's future must be shaped by our own hands to ensure a strong foundation.
Now on Nice Radio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to everyone, and welcome to the New Democratic Party's press conference here at the NDP headquarters. In just a short while, you'll be hearing from the president of the New Democratic Party, leader of the opposition, Dr. the Honorable Godwin Friday, to give you an update on the present state of some national issues, and of course to bring you up to date on some relevant issues relating to the New Democratic Party. So without further ado, I now turn you over to leader of the opposition, president of the New Democratic Party, Dr. the Honorable Godwin Friday. After his statement, the floor will be open for any questions from the media.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Monty. Let me apologize for holding you a bit. All these things have some technical problems with printing or something else, but we are here now, and I am grateful to you for being here and to carry this press conference to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As leader of the opposition and president of the New Democratic Party, as a citizen of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I am alarmed at the spate of recent killings that we've had in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2018. We have had now 16 killings in SVG in 2018. While that number in itself is alarming, for we must remember, it's good to get historical context, that in 2003, there were only 11 murders in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We seem to be getting used to numbers up in the 30s now. The recent spate of 4 killings in 1 week has created even greater alarm, which prompted a local news service to exclaim in its headline, "Death spree, 4 in a row." I think you'll all get the reference. That occurred last week, the most recent being on Friday, July 27th, when it was reported that Billy Adams was killed. The previous week was a bad week as well. It was reported that Lorenzo Gould of Vermont and Marcus Sandy of Arnesville were shot to death in separate incidents during that week. This state of affairs is not just worrying, it is alarming. The seemingly endless reports of killings and serious wounding are creating a feeling of fear and insecurity among ordinary people. The government must take responsibility for this situation. In the years 2016 and 2017, those were record-breaking years for homicides in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In 2017, you'll recall St. Vincent and the Grenadines recorded 40 homicides, a record for this country. At the conversation on crime and violence held by the Christian Council earlier this year, I said that we can only hope that in 2018, this record-breaking trend does not continue. That is still my hope today. But the evidence of far too numerous recent killings is not encouraging. Moreover, there is a tendency within present members in the present government to treat certain reports of gunshot killings as a special type of criminal activity, spawned perhaps by gangs or individuals caught up in a retaliatory frenzy, with the view that we, the rest of society, need not concern ourselves too much with them. That approach says that if we, the law-abiding people, walk on our side of the road, we will be safe from violence, and we need not fear for our lives. That is foolish thinking. Just ask Carlyle Douglas of Nice Radio fame, who was in his house, standing on his porch, on the night of Wednesday, July 18th, when he was shot in the groin area and had to be hospitalized. Fortunately, he survived. But since he was shot and wounded, he could just as easily have been killed. My point is this: crime is crime. Violence is violence, no matter the source and the identity or suspected identity of the people involved. We cannot leave it up to the criminals, so-called, to clean up the streets by wiping out one another. That is chaos and emerging anarchy in our country. Those approaches are familiar in larger, more violent societies, such as areas of Mexico and Venezuela, where the government has lost control of the streets and criminal gangs fill the breach. I call on the government, particularly the Minister of National Security, to be proactive in fighting crime and violence in this country, and to live up to the ULP's campaign promise to be tough on crime and the causes of crime. We all know that slogan. Thus far, the ULP government, after 17 years in office, they have failed to do so. Instead, they have been soft on crime and the causes of crime. They have been soft on corruption. They have been soft on job creation for young people. They have been soft on combating sexual crimes and violence against young girls. Soft on equipping the police properly to fight crime. They have been soft on prosecuting their supporters accused of committing offenses. We'll all remember soap powder and was it white cement? Gonsalves had said that the criminals would be given no space to operate, but the criminals seem to have taken over our country. They, that is the government, they have never done anything to show that they are tough on crime. Now, I know that the crime situation, or crime in general, and the causes of crime are complex and difficult problems. I've said this before in my previous press conference here and in the session held by the Christian Council down at Methodist Church Hall. But we cannot throw up our hands and let mayhem reign in our streets. People expect better from their government. The government's first priority is to provide security for the people. Without security, the necessary environment that will enable them to invest, develop, and prosper will not exist in our country. Security is therefore a precondition to economic development. I repeat that. Security is a precondition to economic development. I would be the first to agree and to say that everyone has a role to play in addressing crime. Everyone has a role to play in addressing violence in our society. I'm not like others who, when they were in opposition, people in the present government who used to say that it was Mitchell's fault or Toussaint, who was then the commissioner of police, fault, and everything basically stopped at their doorsteps. While we all have a role to play, we cannot achieve this by merely locking ourselves in our homes at sunset and passing the night indoors as if we are riding out a storm. Because this storm does not pass if we let it alone. It grows stronger and stronger until even our homes are not safe anymore. We see that in the Carlisle-Douglas incident. Instead, we must seek to understand the problem at its root and to deal with the causes of crime before the situation gets completely out of control. Some say it's already reached that point. I am reminded of the cautionary words of Professor Anthony Harriet, the head of the Institute for Criminal Justice and Security at UWI, when he spoke here earlier this year at the National Conversation on Crime and Violence organized by the Christian Council. I think most of you were there. Having analyzed the crime situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and other CARICOM countries, he spoke about 3 stages or moments in the development of the problem, with the last being a stage of chronic violence that is hard to control and now exists in countries like Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. He cautioned that St. Vincent and the Grenadines may be tending toward this 3rd stage and advised that urgent actions be taken to arrest the slide in that direction. We would do well to heed his call and to follow the advice he offered at that time. I will repeat here, though, what I have said many times, and you've heard many members of the New Democratic Party who have spoken on this issue, in Parliament and outside, that there is a causal connection between economic hardship and an increase in crime. So, clearly one of the ways of addressing the crime problem in this country is to grow the economy and to create jobs and to generate hope for our people, especially for our young people. An unemployment rate among young people in this country, according to the IMF, of 46% is simply intolerable. It is a breeding ground for crime. We must do more to create jobs for our people. We must create in this country an enabling environment for investment and growth. The ULP government has failed woefully in this very important obligation. They have neglected the economy in favor of handouts to selected persons with the correct political credentials. Moreover, political victimization and heavy taxation of vulnerable sectors, such as the hotel and guest house operators who were recently hit with the $8 per night tax, such measures will not get the job done. To combat crime, our police service must also be properly equipped to handle and to respond swiftly to reported instances of crime before they are committed, or at least before they get worse. You've heard stories of people calling the police when incidents are in progress and they said, we can't come because we don't have transport. That's a common refrain. I mean, that is intolerable. I've heard instances that people say they call the police where there's pretty larceny going on, and they said, well, we can't come now, call me in the morning. We'll come in the morning. What's the point of calling the police if they're not going to show up? That's what they're supposed to do. I understand the circumstances under which they operate. But the government, the Minister of Security, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, they have to address this. Because as I said at the top, security is a precondition to economic development. So we have to provide the means for them to respond swiftly and the tools in order to investigate and to do their job better. This is where the focus must be with respect to policing. Not to seek to transfer and punish police officers for trivial matters. The investigation and prosecution of offenses must be improved. Police officers' conditions of work must be improved. People can't be expected to be effective and efficient when in their own personal lives, they're living under difficult, deplorable conditions. If you expect them to function as professionals, then we must treat them as such. The workload on police officers need to be considered by reducing it so that other officers are hired and brought into the force to deal with the problems. However, this must not be done on the basis of finding work for supporters. You talk to the people who are in recruitment and who are training officers, the police academy, and ask about the selection process. And you will hear a lot of the complaints. It must be based on the competence of the individuals to do the job, the willingness to do it, so that they can make use of the training that is provided and then provide the service to our communities. Now, I spoke about other measures that we could take at the previous press conference I had here last year and at the Christian Council's conversation on crime and violence. I adopt those measures here that are outlined. I've given you guys the copies of those statements, and I refer you to them. And I adopt them here again today. What it shows is that the government is basically not responding to these calls and to the advice and the measures that are put forward by professionals like Professor Harriet and others in our community, because the situation appears to be getting worse. It's not improving. Now, this brings me to another matter. I spoke about the connection between generally crime and poor economic conditions. I want to talk about a measure that we took recently, and that is the Arrow Road Forum that took place 2 days ago. On Sunday, July 29th, we had a successful Arrow Road Forum in OER. It was supposed to happen earlier, but you heard that the venue that we were supposed to have, which is the school there, was denied us, and the other venues that we had secured were eventually proved not to be available. But we had given the people, the Arrow Road farmers and the people in OER, the commitment that we would have this forum because they said that they wanted it as well. So on Sunday last, we went to OER and we had the Arrow Road Forum. The purpose of the meeting was to allow me and other members of the party to speak with Arrow Road farmers and community members about their experiences and concerns regarding the state of the Arrow Road industry in North Windward. The meeting was chaired by Nigel Nature Stevenson, and short addresses were presented by me as president of the party and by Roland Patel Matthews, the party's shadow minister for agriculture and principal spokesperson on agriculture, by former representative for North Windward, Monty Roberts, by the NDP's most recent candidate of the constituency and former Agriculture Extension Officer responsible for Arroad, Lauren Sherry-Baptiste. We also heard from the member for Central Kingstown and Vice President of the New Democratic Party, Major Sinclair Leacock. Short addresses were also made by selected Arroad farmers, most notably by the largest such farmers, Mr. Allison Balcom. The addresses were followed by an open session in which members of the community spoke about the problems and the prospects for the Arroad industry. Now, the NDP has given its commitment to the people of this country to come to them to discuss problems. That is the approach that we have adopted. To discuss the problems facing the country and to hear from them about solutions that can be put in place to address them. We have been doing this through our town hall meetings in different parts of the country. We did it in North Leeward, in South Central Windward. We've been doing it by going to meet the people in their homes in what we call our walkabouts and also in our traditional public meetings. We believe this approach is critically important as it allows us in the leadership of the NDP to obtain timely and practical information from people who have first-hand knowledge of the issues being addressed. We believe also that this approach is important because it empowers ordinary people in addressing major problems in their communities and industries. Moreover, this approach is profoundly democratic and has the potential to transform lives, communities, and ultimately our country. What emerged from that Arroad Forum in OEA last Sunday was a tale of neglect and incompetence on the part of the government in the way in which it has handled the Arroad industry over the years. Farmers complained about the lack of access to credit and other money to plant and to care for their crops. This was made worse, they told us, by the chronic late payment for their Arroad that they sell to the government. The volume of Arroad production is way down. One of the speakers there, as I told you, Mr. Balcom, he spoke about years gone by when his families used to sell about £1 million of Arroad. Now he sells only about £20,000. Imagine what the industry used to be. He sells £20,000 thereabouts, and then he has to wait sometimes long times to get paid for his crop. Other problems that were noticed was a lack of extension officers from the Ministry of Agriculture to assist the farmers. In fact, when we ask about that, what services they get, people, they laugh. They say, what extension officer? They seem to be on their own. They also spoke about the problem of spoilage of the Arroad after it's delivered to the factory, either because there are problems in the factory or lack of proper storage. One of the things that the farmers and the community there complained bitterly about was the talk that they heard that the Arroad factory was going to be moved from Oya to Orange Hill, and that this was going to be a backward step if it were implemented, because the necessary resources, mainly water, that is needed in the processing is not present in Orange Hill. This was a constant complaint from the people in the area, and people with very, very intimate knowledge of the processing of Arrowroot. So the government should take heed, and if there's any intention of doing so, to scrap that plan. We in the NDP, of course, will continue to study the industry, to hear not just from the farmers, but from other professionals who have valuable resources, valuable information, and insights from which we can benefit, because we are very serious when we say that we want to turn the story of our route in North Windward around to be a tale of joy and prosperity. I will say this to the arrowroot farmers and to the community in North Windward. One, the NDP is committed to getting the arrowroot industry back on its feet and to making it once again profitable for the farmers in the area. Number two, we will keep the factory in Oria. If there's any plan to move it, we agree with them, we take their advice, that it's better for it to stay where it is, in Oya, where the water resources are available for the processing. That, the farmers tell us, makes more sense. And as I say, they are the true expert in the production of arrowroot. So we listen to them. Number three, we will empower the farmers in the industry by making them an essential part of the planning and decision-making in the industry. This is how it used to be in the old days. It has been taken away from the farmers. In sum, we in the New Democratic Party, we believe that the arrowroot industry has a bright future in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What's more, the people in North Windward told us that they believe it as well. So, with careful, sensible planning and actions together, we can make this industry work for the farmers. We can make it work for the communities in North Windward. And of course, in doing so, we make it work for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We can make things better. Now, I want to make a brief comment about something that really has been on my mind, has caused me grave concern. And I will just introduce it here because I've asked a question in Parliament about it, and we will continue to do some work on it. And that has to do with the performance of our secondary school education system. In the recent graduation ceremonies, I attended all of them in Bequia and one or two here on the mainland. I was again reminded of the poor performance of our secondary schools. Away from the high flyers at the top secondary schools like Grammar School and Girls High School and Thomas Saunders, a very worrying picture is emerging. Contrary to the government's boasts about the performance of our education system, the picture of failure looms large. The number of children who enter secondary school gives a false impression that a secondary school education is available to all. But the stark reality is that in some schools, very little education is taking place. Many children drop out before they reach Form 5 or before the 5 years it would normally take them to make the journey through secondary school. I recently attended a graduation ceremony. I don't want to pick on them, but it's the one that I'm familiar most and it's close to me because it's in my community. I recently attended a graduation ceremony at the Bequia Community High School. I attended that school when it was first created so many years ago. It was a proud institution. 10 students graduated this year. I am told that 28 started 5 years ago. and only 8 of those who started completed it, because 2 other persons transferred in after Form 1. So the total of 10 graduated this year. What was also striking is that the 10 who graduated, there was only 1 boy. Imagine that. Of those who survived to write the CXC exam, which, as we know, is usually taken as the test of successfully completing secondary school, we await their results and we hope they do well. How can it be considered progress? When only 1/3 of the students who start in school, in some schools, survive to take that exam. I am told that it's not a unique situation at all at the Beckley Community High School. Why are most of our children allowed to drop out of secondary school before they complete the program? Why are there no programs geared to those likely to drop out early so that they might have a better chance of completing secondary school? Clearly, urgent action is needed to address this serious problem. You can't just say there's universal secondary education. You can't just point to the brilliant students who do 19 and 20 subjects and get 18 ones. That is not the way to measure the performance of our education system. We have to look at what's happening to most of the children, to the average children, because by definition, average is most of the people. This is all the people who are here. The system has to cater to them. I spoke about a terrible crime situation in this country earlier on. This is where it starts. If it doesn't start here, it gets its fuel here when these youngsters drop out so early and can't find a place in this very difficult economy. We owe them better than that. We in the New Democratic Party, we will be doing more to find out what is really happening and to find ways, or to propose ways in which it can be addressed. For too long, I've spoken to people in the Ministry of Education about the situation in my community, but there seems to be nothing is being done. It's almost to the point where it seems like nothing is worth doing. We can't treat our children like that. I would like to hear more people talk about what's happening, not just in the Kingston schools, what's happening outside, so we get a truer picture of how our secondary school system is performing. Education is not going into a door. It's what happens between the ears when you go into that door. And if you don't transform a mind, there's no education taking place. If you don't give hope. I mean, I've heard some stories that will break your heart about people who go to school and don't have the opportunity to finish. We have to do better than that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Friday. It's open to any questions members of the media would like to ask. Now is the opportunity.
Okay, pleasant. Good morning. This is Ken Villan from the Vincentian newspaper. Mr. Friday, you would have spoken about the crime situation and the need for improvement in the situation. If your administration is to take, or your party is to take from government, what sort of crime fighting measures are you particularly interested in implementing? And secondly, there is a situation where and you see someone has been arrested for a crime, but the situation works out in the end. They're put on remand for a year or two or so, and then after they're released back into the society without anyone being sentenced, any sort of thing like that. What do you think we can do different as a lawyer to prevent this from happening?
No, we have a criminal lawyer. Maybe she could address that more directly. But here's the thing that I want to talk about. What I say to you. I mean, I've said this. I refer you, as I said, to the previous press conference. I don't want to take up the time and rehashing grounds that we have covered. But the primary thing that we are focused on is that you have to provide hope and opportunity to people. That is the overall environment in which people can succeed by getting through the school system and finding opportunity for constructive employment. Otherwise, as I said, the devil finds work for idle hands. So that is a priority that we would deal with, is to find work, to create opportunities, especially for the young people as they come out of school. But there, of course, there are immediate things that can be addressed in the crime fighting situation. We've talked about in the past community policing, making sure that there is that connection between the people being policed and the police officers, so that everybody has a stake in dealing with crime. You can't have a situation where the police are viewed as the enemy and then think that when you go to talk to people that they're going to cooperate. That whole approach has to be changed. And I've seen it where, people, they just don't cooperate because they feel that the police are, they don't behave in a way that encourages them to do so. And we want people to cooperate with the police. So that is something that we will encourage. Definitely. Better training for the police officers. Professionalizing the police force. You talk to people who know, and they talk about right now in the current the police force that there's this feeling of that certain people are getting ahead and others are not. And when you feel that you've done your work, you've done what you're supposed to do, and you don't get promoted, and others come and they get promoted when they have a special allegiance to party in power, somebody close to them, then it saps your initiative. So those kinds of changes within the police force would have to certainly take place for them to become more effective. Then you have to equip them. I mean, you can't have police officers doing their work when you say that you call them and they don't have transport. Sometimes they want to make a phone call. Even from the police station, they have to ask to use your cell phone because they're not connected. I mean, come on. These are basic things, but they make a difference in how they respond and how they see themselves as crime fighters. There are special types of crime. We have this situation. We talk about, of course, the high-profile crimes of murders and so on. But the situation in the agricultural districts where you have predial larceny is rampant. There were special constables who were created, but they don't seem to have had any impact on the problem. If you're going to deal with the problem, you don't just create a job for somebody. You make sure that these people are capable and that they do the work. And if they don't, that they're replaced so that you deal with the crimes in those areas. Special units to deal with sexual violence. The way in which it's prosecuted here. We know, we've said this in the past, that sexual violence in this country is endemic. It's a disgrace the way in which you go down to the assizes and you look on the door and you see the list of sexual offenses that are to be prosecuted. So that is something that definitely you have to have special attention being paid to deal with that aspect of crime. We are a tourism and venue, one of the areas, and it has had some impact in my community in Bequia. Crimes against yachts and visitors. There has to be a special way of dealing with those because these people come for a short period of time. If you're going to prosecute, you have to do it quickly. You have to get information and you have to find a way in which to, first of all, prevent, but when you can't, that you give the best possible means of getting the prosecution completed in a timely way so that the people don't come and go, and eventually they don't come back and the case is dismissed. And sometimes that happens with very serious offenses.
Okay, the second aspect of my question, I guess I can.
She's well, you can come. Come in. Just so that everybody can get the benefit of this.
I didn't quite understand the question, because what you said was that the person may have been on remand for maybe about 2 years or so and then released back into the community. So that raises the issue that there was not a trial. I don't know if you meant they were tried and then found not guilty. If you could explain what you meant.
There are two situations that exist. As you said, they go to trial and there is no charge or sentencing. When it goes to trial, so it goes to trial, nothing comes out of it, the case is dismissed. And there's another situation where the person's being they're being put on remand for a year or two, and then basically nothing comes out of it.
Okay.
So what we're saying basically is nobody being held accountable for the crimes that have been committed.
Okay. First of all, the basic thing is that not everyone who is charged with a crime is guilty, and that is always a good starting point, because sometimes I find the media tend to think as soon as you're charged with a crime you are guilty. In our constitution, you're innocent until proven guilty, and so when you're charged with a crime you have to go through the process of a trial. Sometimes I do agree that the trial process takes extraordinarily long. So for somebody to be on remand for 2 years awaiting their trial, that is not good. It is not good for the victims. It is not good for the persons who are accused. And so the administration, they have tried somewhat to increase the number of cases that are heard at the assizes, because long ago we used to have assizes only for three times a year, for limited periods. Now the assizes run almost a year, and still the crime rate has increased so much that you still cannot get persons on remand have their trials done in a timely manner. So that is something that has to be looked into. If you're going to have rampant crime, you have to have a better way of having persons tried, and this is what this government has failed to do. Despite the fact, as I acknowledge that they have tried, it is not enough. Because many times when cases are set down for trial for various reasons, it cannot be heard, and it is not only the defense's fault. Sometimes witnesses are not ready, witnesses are out of state, all sorts of things. So that system needs to be improved. There need to be timely trials between when persons are charged and when they are tried. Now, if you are tried and you go through the system and you are acquitted, well, the system has worked. Now, if it is not, if persons are unsatisfied, there is always the appeal process. Generally, DPPs do not appeal persons who are released, because you have a jury. If it is a serious offense enough, it is in the court and the jury would have released them, persons of their peers, and that is how the system is meant to work. So I'm glad you raised the question from this point of view, because there seemed to be a perception among some media houses that if somebody is charged with a crime and they are released, it is because the system has failed. So that if the thinking is that once you're charged with a crime, you should be found guilty, what is the point of having a trial? You see? So that we have to be aware of that, that if you go through the system, a jury releases you, there's no appeal, then the system has worked. That is the way it is supposed to be. It is not every person who is charged with a crime is guilty. And so it may not be just that the defense is good. It may be just that the case was weak, you see. And I think that answers that aspect about coming back into the community. I wondered if you were alluding to the issue of persons who are convicted, and then when they are released from jail or when they pay their fines or so, they are put back into the community. I don't know if you wanted me to address that aspect of it also. We say sexual offenses, etc. We do not have a sexual offenses registry as such. to tag persons or to ban them from certain neighborhoods if they have been found guilty of some serious sexual offenses. And that is something that I think we can look at for introducing, that if you are found guilty of certain offenses, especially sexual offenses like pedophilia and incest and those type of offenses, carnal knowledge and so, there need to be some sort of register where persons can be registered as sexual offenders, so that the community at large may be warned, so that they do not repeat, or it is harder for them to repeat the offenses. So those basically would be my comments in answer to your question.
Yes, sir.
Coming out of the RU forum, were there any solutions that jumped out to you in relation to increasing production activities?
Well, one of the things that the farmers spoke about is the availability of credit, money, to enable them to plant, in a timely manner and in the quantities they wish to do, and to provide fertilizer for the caring of their crop. That is something that is endemic. It's throughout the industry there. They also they told us about the fact that the purchasing from, when they are entitled now to reap the crop. It used to be in November. This is what they told us, but now it's going back later into the next year in March and April and so on. And by that time, the starch content is lower, and so that the yield is a lot lower, and it essentially reduces what is produced. And that is something that Monty Roberts, who was there, he said in the time when he worked, he was a representative of the area in the New Democratic Party government of Sir James Mitchell, that he used to plan in advance, in September and so. He said this at the forum, and he would tell Sir James, who was finance minister, this is what we need in terms of allocation. The people are going to be harvesting, and you must have the funds to pay them. And you don't leave it in the ground until basically it's convenient for you to pay. And by that time, it's affecting the quality of the crop. So those are things that are, the solutions are there. It's not rocket science. Why it has been allowed to get to the point where it's now can only be explained through a case of neglect. I mean, it's simply that they don't care. I mean, I can't put it any other way.
Good morning, Dr. Friday and Senator Bacchus-Baptiste. Ashford Peters from the News newspaper. My first question is about the productive sector and what seems to be a very serious problem. We have AIDS, HIV/AIDS, that is destroying much of the productive sector. We have a lot of the criminals in that area. We have a lot of people who are dying from crime as well. We had a lot of these people in mental asylum because of drugs. Now, how does it look in the future for economic development, and is this something that your party is seriously applying its mind to, and how do you look at it going forward?
Yeah, well, Ashford, I leveled my criticisms very directly here today, but I don't see that the situation is irretrievable or that there's need for, doom and gloom forever. There are things that can be done. There are opportunities in our education system for young people to benefit. We just need to make it much more targeted to the people who come in so that when they come out, they're productive. There are opportunities for economic development in this country. We've had funds that came in here from the European Union that would have created capital investments in certain parts of of agriculture that were not taken up by the government, and I've been asking, and nobody can say why. And those funds are there to help in the transition from banana into other areas, and the investments have not been made. That's $60–70 million that's returned that could have been pumped into the economy. There are opportunities in the agricultural sector that are simply not being exploited. I mean, we have some very highly trained people in the Ministry of Agriculture. Why are they not being given the task to say, you know, to go out? We had the road farmers who told us, and I don't think they were lying when they said that the extension officers don't come. They don't have extension officers that come out there. And that's an industry that area is synonymous with North Windward. As one of the speakers said at the Road Forum, it's like their culture. It's part of your identity. The same way like fishing is part of the identities in Barley and in my community in Paget Farm and so on. It's what you know, it's what you it's part of what you are. But the opportunities are there, but they're just simply not being taken up. And part of the problem comes from the approach. I took the time deliberately to set out here something I've said many times, but I think sometimes it's glossed over because it seems like such common sense, but it's not being done, which is to say you start with the problem, not with the solution. You go to the communities, you find out what the issues are, what the problems are, and you tailor solutions based on the problems. You don't come in and build a fisheries complex, like a $33 million complex they have in OEA. You know? I'm told that they're processing conchs there. Where do they get the conchs from? That is a solution in search of a problem. And what I set out here to say that our approach is basically to come from the other side. This is to listen. Our function as government is to solve problems of people so that they could go on and live their lives better. You can solve the problem of security by making the police and policing more effective, by improving the preventive measures. One of them is making sure that people stay in school. When they come out, they have a skill, they can do something. You know, I see young men who go to community college, they come back as plumbers, electricians, and so on. They're not the ones you hear getting involved in serious scrapes. They enjoy themselves too, but they're productive. They have work, they have jobs. You know, and that is the sort of thing that we need to do. An education, secondary education, or universal secondary education is only a label if, as I said, in this case here, 2/3 of the children don't make it to Form 5. You know, what do you do with a 15-year-old out in the street? I mean, how you deal with a situation where you have a class of 10 and only one boy?
But if you have the mortality rate, you know, going up, how is this going to?
Well, I don't know that the mortality rate is going up. I mean, I have to look at the overall statistics. There may be some areas and so on where it is. There are serious problems, of course, health problems in this country. We know that with hypertension, diabetes, and just the poor care that you get at the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital because of lack of resources. I've been down there, I've seen the nurses and the professionals there. They try mightily with the resources they have, but it's a challenge. But I don't know that, Ashford, that the problem is one where, you know, that the population is weakened by some sort of ailment. I think it really is a problem that we are not providing constructive opportunities for young people to go into. So what they do is many of them, they try to find an opportunity to leave our shores. And, you know, of course, it's always a challenge for a country to develop when, especially our bright young minds, all find, you know, greener pastures elsewhere. We want to keep them here.
Okay. My next question, as you stated in your opening statement that you are alarmed by the spate of killings recently. Now,
4 in a row, yes.
Okay. Well, you would recall, I believe you're aware that many of these people who are being killed, right, are witnesses to in trials. Now, do you think that the state has failed to protect these witnesses?
If that is the case, obviously it has failed. But this is news to me. You know, I've heard various other persons say that this is gang-related violence. I think somebody in the government said that earlier this year, that somehow, don't worry about that. It ain't about you because it's them fellas cleaning up one another. You know, that's what I've heard as the interpretation. But I mean, obviously, you're doing that. That's chaos. It means that the government is not in control. Crime is crime. You know, what do you want to say, that some people are bad people, so let them deal with themselves? Crime is crime. Somebody breaks into your home, somebody dies of a gunshot wound, and then somebody next weekend who's related dies, and so on. There's some pattern or connection, but this is where the police comes in. And very often, if you hearing these things, the police must hear them too. So there must be ways in which they can intervene early and
These are
address them.
published facts.
Hmm?
But these are published facts. But
Okay.
as a member of parliament, you would have gone through the process in passage of the what is known as the Witness Special Measures Act. Hence the reason, hence I asked the question before.
Yes.
Because if we have this act that provides some security for witnesses, the question then becomes, is it being utilized? Is it being used in the manner or for the purpose so intended when this act, when the bill was debated?
Yeah.
That became an act.
Well, I'll just make a general comment, and I'll ask my colleague who practices in this area to address it more detail. The point is that, you know, the need for such a measure, you know, witness protection, when you think about it, it's kind of frightening, you know. That's the sort of thing that happens when you have organized crime, you know, like mafia hits and so on. People don't mind coming in the middle of Kingston and shooting somebody. That is a frightening thing. And this is why I referred as well to the comments that Professor Harriet made earlier this year, when he said that we in St. Vincent, we are, you know, if you talk about the 3 stages, that we are somehow tending towards the chronic violence stage, where, you know, and he describes certain of the characteristics that are frightening, you know, where small little insults and so on could result in somebody responding in a disproportionate way. You know, before somebody might have had a fist fight and now it's a matter of shooting. But I will let my colleague speak about that. But certainly, if you have measures and tools, is one thing, you know, is to create an architecture in the laws for these things. The next thing is you have to put the resources and the means to do it. You know, and I'm sure Kay will say something about that.
Ashford, yes, the act is in place and it is being used. I myself have had the DPP apply to use it in about 2 or 3 cases, but it works in both ways for the defense as well as for the Crown. What happens is that the witnesses could give evidence by video link rather than actually appearing in court. And they can be cross-examined, etc., by video link. The issue with that, of course, is that the jury is somewhat deprived of the actual presence, the emotion, and it could turn out to be not beneficial to the defense, okay? Because sometimes when the witnesses understand, you can better look at the demeanor and determine whether they're telling lies or not. So it removes that advantage. And gives the Crown an advantage in that respect. However, it can also be used for the defense, because I've been involved in a case where we actually had a witness who gave evidence by video link from Canada for the defense. And by applying for the same, using it under the witness protection or the special measures, which special measures means not only protecting the witness, but permitting the trial to continue without the actual presence of the witness. You know, not only because they may be afraid to come, but maybe because they're in another jurisdiction and they're not available.
This would help with the Yachty's crimes.
Yes,
crimes
it
against
will.
Tourists, yeah.
It will. So the act is operational, and as I said, they have applied. The DPP, they have used it in a few cases indeed. The protection aspect of it is also, as was raised, the issue of finance, because if you're going to protect the witnesses, you have to put them into an environment where St. Vincent is small, so you may have to take them out of the jurisdiction. Now, that has been done in a case that I was involved in, where the witnesses were relocated into another community, an unknown address, outside the Caribbean, and in some cases inside the Caribbean. The address is unknown, and then they give the evidence by video link. And so that has been done, but it's an expensive process. So I think they reserve it for really, really serious cases, and then it is not automatic. Not because the DPP applies for it, it will be given. You have to go through arguments and present your case, and the defense can present their case to. There's case law governing it to decide whether or not this is a case for a special measure.
So then, in a situation where, as we have seen just recently, witnessing a matter has gone down, we've had other cases as well. Then how do we protect, given that trend, how do we move to deal with these issues where witnesses are dropped here in serious, well, mostly murders, and they're exposed? Do we say, how do we treat it?
I'm going to give you the political and the legal argument. If you listen to what the government has been saying, that it is just criminals killing criminals, you can understand why they're doing nothing. Because the comments that were made, some of the comments made tend to, which I think Honorable Julian Francis, and I think even the Prime Minister, sometimes you have to be very careful and responsible in your comments. Some of the comments made would say, oh, it is not really a bad crime situation, it's just a few criminals attacking one another. Now, if you're going to say that, you are setting up criminals to kill one another, because you're going to think that the administration will not take every measure to protect you. And so your question is valid from that perspective. Yep. That's from the political angle. Legally, as you say, there is legislation for, even before there was legislation, as a matter of fact, the state used to put some witnesses into protective custody, even before the legislation. So now you have legislation. I think once the witness approaches the DPP or the police, but you have to, the witness will have to give proper reason, good reason for these measures, because as I say, it is expensive. You have to feed them, you have to keep them out of, and they themselves will be out of communication with their loved ones too. So it's a balancing act.
So can we afford that which we have passed in our parliament?
Well, if we're looking after safety, we have to afford it. If we're looking after safety, if we're looking after the fact that when you charge someone, witnesses must be able to present the evidence, then we have to afford it.
I think, Dr. Friday,
yes,
in your statement, you mentioned, you didn't say street justice, but that is what it amounts to when you said you cannot allow criminals to deal with. Now, if this trend is to continue, because it is known, publicly, and we look at some cases recently where witnesses or virtual complainants, witness as well, they have refused to or failed to go to court to give evidence in a matter, and we know where those matters. The most recent one, I think, is the murder of the baby in Glen. Now, some people might have their concerns because, already there are talks that, look, this kind of, these guys might settle, their own scores. Now, how do you see that or this trend undermining the system of justice in St. Vincent and Grenadines?
It's a very serious matter, Ashford, because as my colleague said, there's a presumption of innocence. There's a criminal justice process that must be, you have to go through that in order to convict somebody of an offense. And if any part of it breaks down, then the system doesn't work. And the result of that could be, lawlessness, basically, and escalation in crime. It happens in the criminal justice system. It happens also with, white-collar crime. It happens in other areas where people turn a blind eye. This is where you have corruption, for example, in the civil side of things, in certain government offices where nobody does anything, and so people get paid off for doing all kinds of things. That is where the system breaks down. The checks and balances are not there. In this case, the prosecution of offenses, if you can't convict persons whom, the evidence is pretty much there, but you can't get the witness to come to do it, and the person has a right to cross-examine witnesses. You have to, you can't use hearsay evidence in certain, in the cases. These are things that are a serious threat to how the system would function. And so the measures that are introduced would have to be properly financed, as my colleague has said. And when there are problems emerging, then we have to be creative in finding ways to deal with them. Witnesses that don't come to court is a problem, not just here, it happens elsewhere, but it's what I said earlier on. That is, it's a serious sort of emerging trend in our criminal in our situation. When you had murders where you have an individual, it's a one-off thing. One individual against an individual. It may be something with family members. It may be something where you have anger and so on. But when it's organized and you have retaliatory strikes and so on, then it becomes a very, very serious matter. And that is where you have to have specialized police and agencies, maybe domestic and regional and elsewhere, to assist, who have resources and more experience to assist in dealing with this matter. I mean, this is something that's happened in Jamaica. In some cases, the army has been called out. Curfew has been imposed in certain areas in order to try and bring about order. Imagine that. You don't have a state of crisis, just a matter from crime and violence, and you have to have a curfew. You have to bring the army into it. That's an alarming situation. It's a trend we don't want to happen here. But if we take the trend that's been happening, if you look at the murder statistics in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that's where people usually look at the more high-profile cases. In 2003, there were 11. 2004, 25, 2005, 24, 2006, 13, and then we look more recently, 2014, 27, 2015, 37, 2016, 39, 2017, 40, and thus far in 2018, we have 16, and we are just in the middle of July, so there seems to be a sort of a tailing off at the higher end, and that is just for homicides, Nobody talks about trivial larceny because it doesn't get high profile, but that's a crime that's endemic. It's destroying agriculture in this country. The crimes against tourist yachties, you've heard me talk about this from my own community, but it happens here on the mainland, Walilabu and various other bays and down in southern Grenadines. These are things that we have to have. You have to have specialized units to deal with them because they affect our livelihood. I was very, very deliberate when I said, in the introduction, that security is a precondition to economic development. Think about it. When you say, oh, things are hard and so on, why people don't come and invest? They don't feel secure. If you were living in a country and you have money to invest, and you look at St. Vincent, a few of the things they look at, first of all, the criminal justice system. They want to know if you have fair laws and just laws and that they're enforced. They look at healthcare. They look at if you have young children, you want to know if the school system is so on. And if those things that don't satisfy you, then you may not invest in the country. And even our own people, if they see that if you have the sense of alarm that things are getting out of hand, that you're not safe, they may move somewhere else. They take their money to a safer community somewhere else, and then we suffer. So it is fundamentally important. Security is a precondition to development, and the only institution that really can guarantee security is government, because they have a monopoly on the use of violence, of force. They can use measures to implement the measures that are necessary to combat crime. You as a citizen, you can protect yourself in your home, but you can't go and prosecute somebody. Well, you used to be able to.
But then, if we're talking crime or crime fighting, serious business, can be very expensive. Now, do you see, in light of the situation where witnesses are either being killed or they're refusing to go to court to give evidence, and especially where you might have perhaps one key witness that you're really relying on?
Yeah.
Do you see us moving more toward a greater reliance on forensic or expert witnesses?
Well, that has always, I'm not a practitioner in criminal law, but that's always been a call from the police officers, the people who have been victimized and so on, and people who come and they see, well, how do you actually prosecute crimes here? And having to rely on witnesses, and you don't have the use of forensic evidence. Of course, that is going to limit what you can do. How far it's going to go, you've seen the television shows that seem to say that all you have to do is put some science in there and you can convict somebody. And it's probably never that easy. But certainly there are things that we can do to make use of the science to assist in the prosecution of offenses. I don't know if you want to say anything
Yes,
about that.
actually, I think it's a good issue that you raised there, because many cases that I have done, the prosecution has failed wholly to make use of forensic evidence. They may come, yes, they mark out the scene, they take exhibits, etc., and nothing happens to them. Or they send them away and you never get a report. Even ballistic reports. Even long ago, you used to get more reports from experts matching ballistics with, you know, the evidence with the gun, etc. You hardly get back reports now. They seem to base the evidence out of beating a confession out of the defendants, or hoping they have enough witnesses who would have seen. Most times crimes are committed, nobody is there to give eyewitness evidence. And you raise a very, very important point in combating crime. The forensics in St. Vincent is sadly lacking. Even a simple thing as taking photograph evidence. You would be surprised how many police cases, they bring the photographer, they take the pictures, and when you get to court, you never see the pictures. Either they're overexposed, so they're no good, or they never bother to even produce the photographs. Or when you see the photographs, they're so dark, you cannot really understand what they are. And this is something that's fingerprinting, a thing of the past. The forensic in St. Vincent right now is wholly lacking. Something drastic has to be done about it. A very good point you raised.
And then when you couple that, Ashford, with the concern you raised earlier about witnesses being threatened and being possibly killed, then you understand that the importance of relying on just simply on witnesses is quite a weakness in the system of prosecution. But it also goes back to what I said earlier, you know. The fact that we're speaking about this tells of a transition that's taking place in the type of offenses, the way in which the perpetrators seem to be organized in a way that perhaps we weren't familiar with in the early parts of this century, well, the last century. And this is something that we have to be aware of and get ahead of. Otherwise, we will be in a very, very difficult situation. Like in some parts, I said in my notes, say Mexico, you've heard, you know, places where basically the police have no-go zones. You know, in Venezuela, you can't have that in a country and say that you have a rule of law.
I just wanted to ask one more question, because I was trying to get that point out from Ms. Bacchus Baptiste about the prosecution failure and the forensic evidence. That's why I was asking the question in the first instance, and I'm happy Ashford would have asked. This question I want to ask, however, is regard to Taiwan and China. The NDP under the leadership of Mr. Eustace would have indicated...
Was that in my notes?
would have indicated its intention to switch diplomatic ties to China away from Taiwan. Should the party form government, I want to know if that is something the party is still considering, or are you willing to maintain ties with Taiwan?
Well, Mr. Horn, we've stated publicly the position of the party. You know, our position is that we adopt the one China policy, as you know, which recognizes mainland China as representative. That's the position that the party has adopted. That's a position that remains in force in the party. Naturally, we take positions based on what we think are in the best interest of our country and for us being effective as a government. And that is a situation as it is now, but as a situation, none of these things are carved in stone. You know, as it is now, we have adopted that position and we act in accordance with it. And we're trusting and hoping that we will be able to form government in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that position will turn out to be beneficial to our country.
In terms of what Taiwan would have contributed as well. In terms of what Taiwan would have contributed as well to St. Vincent, a lot of persons, some persons would have said it would be unfair for us to just.
Well, I mean, it's a two-way street, you know. I mean, both parties have benefited from it. But the point of the matter is, you don't do things that are in the national interest based on fairness and unfairness for one party or the other. we have to look for the interests of our country. If we think that this is in the interest of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we will persist with such policy. If we think it is not, we will change the policy. And don't forget, we are the opposition. You know, we don't make policy there. Our still diplomatic relations are with Taiwan. You know, and this is what the policy that the government pursues. Taiwan continues to do, you know, all the good things that you've mentioned here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they continue to have relations, formal relations with the country. It's not a situation that we choose, you know. Like, the point of the matter is, it's really a situation that both countries, Taiwan and mainland China, have established, that if you establish relations with one, you do not have relations with the other.
Yes, Dr. Ashford Peters again. Just one final question.
Thank you.
Your party has a policy on medicinal marijuana. Now, on the issue of going to supporting the CCJ or moving towards the CCJ, you're saying that you're proposing that there be consultation. Why is it need for consultation on the CCJ and not on the marijuana, medicinal marijuana?
Well, I mean, we have, when I say consultation, you understand what I mean. We've had consultation on marijuana. We've been to North Leeward and had a meeting up there at Fitzhughes. That was the main subject when we were explaining the position that our party was adopting. At the time, it was just the emerging policy of the present government as well. But with respect to the CCJ, as you know, the Privy Council is our final court of appeal. This is the issue has become now part of the, again, public discussion because of the recent function that was held here for Justice Adrian Saunders, Chief Justice, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And the party's opposition that we adopted in the 2009 referendum was one where we felt that the people were being consulted there. We felt that there were serious issues of confidence in the judicial system, issues that were permeating the society. It's not just a matter for us as individuals, you know, and the situation remains the same today. I mean, I've been questioning and talking to people. When I say consult, you have to ask people what are their views with respect to this. There may come a time when people will say, well, okay, fine, we have sufficient confidence now in the court system and we want to go forward. As leaders, we will heed that call. But right now, I don't think, and what I've said is that there is the talk of somehow that you can adopt the CCJ simply by going to Parliament and having a 2/3 majority of the members present. And that is where I had made the comment to say, no, this has to go back to the people, because they made a decision. It was one of the main issues in the referendum campaign of 2009. And so it can't be said that it was not an issue that the people are voted upon. And so it would be incumbent upon us to go back to the people as a country for them to make a decision on this matter. And that's the position that we hold to. I think it's consistent with what we've held in the past.
Maybe I could just add that our constitution requires a referendum. And I think it is in that context that we speak about consultation. Because if you're going to have a referendum, the people would need to know what is happening. They would need to understand the issues. I think they do already, because in 2009, we see what happened. But Dr. Gonsalves has been saying that as far as he is concerned, a referendum is no longer required. That is not my position. He's saying this because of the decision out of St. Lucia, based on the question that was taken to the Court of Appeal in St. Lucia following the the passing of the Attorney General's Reference Act, where the question was taken to in St. Lucia as to whether or not a referendum was required. The opinion of the court, by I think it's a 2-to-1 majority, was that a referendum was not required. I subscribe to the opinion of the dissenting judgment, which was very, very well done, that a referendum is still required. I think that is a feeling in the other Caribbean islands, certainly in Jamaica, that a referendum would be required. So it is not automatic to believe, as Dr. Gonsalves is saying, that a referendum is no longer required, just a 2/3 majority in the House. That issue is still to be tested as far as I'm concerned. It was just an opinion, and that was the point I was making when I was debating that Attorney General's Reference Act. It's the same one was passed in St. Vincent. What is given is an opinion. It is not a judgment. It is not binding. It doesn't really have the force of law. So it could be a waste of taxpayers' money. when you take a question to the court and the court gives an opinion and you don't necessarily have to follow it. It's exactly that I was speaking about, that what was the weakness of passing this act, but it is not a decision that is appealable or a decision that you're bound by.
Yeah, but of course, you know, in the 2009 election, referendum, that case was not an issue for us. Right now, we are saying as a democratic principle, simply because this matter, we go further, quite frankly, than the legality of it, that since the people are so concerned about this, you know, it's the thing that most people talk to me about when they meet me now. They ask me about it and what is our position and where, you know, are we going to be taking the CCJ? And Friday, I hear the Prime Minister say that you must bring the thing to Parliament, you know, and so on, and they're very concerned about it. And my response to that is that, you know, since when has the opposition never been invited or accommodated in bringing any motion to Parliament? We had a right to bring a motion of no confidence to the Parliament some time ago. We brought it, we followed the rules to the letter, you know. It was properly before the House, and what did they do? They say you can debate the motion, but only the one that we design, you know. So let's make it a motion of confidence for the government. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the notion that somehow, if you're serious, then don't throw it in our lap. You know, you can't tell us what to do in our party. You know, make a decision on your own, and then we will make our decision based on our feeling of what's happening with the people and our concentration with the people, and the people must have a vote on it.
Live Compton Searchlight newspaper. If we were to indeed have a referendum as it relates to the CCJ, what would the NDP's stance be? Would we see something like what happened in 29, where there was arguments against it and trying to convince people not to vote?
Well, you see, a lot of the problems, the issues that we raised, you know, about people's confidence in the judicial system. I mean, you know, they have made their positions known. Those situations have not been addressed. In fact, we have heard, you know, comments made about the judicial system by persons in power, which ought not to be made. It doesn't inspire confidence in the judicial system. And when people hear this, they come to us to seek our assurance, you know, not our advice. Very often it's assurance to say, well, listen, this is, we have made up our mind in this question. And we have discussions back and forth about the pros and the cons and so on. And maybe at some point, you know, they will be persuaded that this is the direction that you should go. But at this point in time, that is not my view of how the thing is, how people are feeling, and we maintain our position.
Well, this is kind of subtle way of saying that we have corruption in the judiciary, where we don't trust the judges in the CCJ.
Well, trust. I mean, you've taken your own words. I wouldn't put it like that. No. Trust is based on, you know, there are lots of things that affect people's confidence one way or another. It doesn't have to be corruption. You know, outcomes that may not be what they ought to be in their case, or that they feel that you know, just the way in which the closeness our politicians are to the smallest of our societies. I think that's part of the thing. People from abroad have been sending me emails or WhatsApp messages and saying, oh, it's, you know, it's so better to have this entity that is divorced from all the stuff that is happening here, making these decisions. I mean, there's argument forcing that argument. That has nothing to do with corruption. And I certainly would not subscribe to that view.
Mr. Friday,
Final
pleasant
question?
afternoon.
Yeah.
Right, pleasant afternoon, Mr. Friday.
Good
I'm also
afternoon.
listening in the diaspora. I'd like to bring across a question on the unemployment rate among the youths.
Yes.
If you were in power, what implementations you would have put in place to deal with that?
Yes, well, that is a very, very good question. The first thing that has to happen is, of course, you have to recognize the importance of the problem. And not the importance, but the scope of the problem. I said at the beginning, and repeat, that we have to create an environment where jobs are created in this country. We have now in St. Vincent where investment is flying away from our shores. Yeah, the job situation is bad because of that. You create jobs, generally speaking, it helps the young people. And that is what we are going to do. We are going to have an environment where people feel safe about investing, that they're not going to be politically victimized because they take a position one way or another, that corruption in terms of how they go about their business will be eliminated, and certainly any instances of it will be prosecuted. And so we believe that in creating an environment for investment and opportunities, that will help young people. Most of all, though, I think we have to look at specific sectors of the economy to try to foster. Young people are particularly interested in things like information technology and that area. And I think there's a lot of potential there. That's an area that we in the Democratic Party have said in our economic plan and in our manifestos that we will focus on. And in fact, we have established links, very close links with individuals, companies that have the capacity to implement programs here that will help young people. And the frustration for us is that it will not happen unless we are in government, because they will not do it here under this present administration. This is what they have said, because the environment is not friendly to businesses. And so the change will have to come for that to happen. Of course, entrepreneurship, when we had the youth dialogue some time ago here was it November last year already? We had individuals there who were talking about, getting into farming in a modern way, using technology, using producing commodities that perhaps were not done before, but in a sort of niche market, rather than everybody growing bananas, everybody growing arrowroot, everybody growing breadfruit or whatever the crop is. There are certain things that individuals can produce that would using modern technology, using irrigation techniques, using the means at our disposal now to raise the productivity so that they can make profit. But the point is, you have to treat it as a business, not as something that you fall into. My father was a farmer, I'm a farmer, sort of thing, and you continue doing it the same way. The IMF has told us that we have to take an agribusiness approach now to agriculture, and the same thing in the fishing industry, that you take a business-oriented approach, which means that the government has to have an enabling environment that allows young people. There are young people now who are fishing in doing trawling, with the trawlers going out to catch tuna. I'm told there's a decent living there. This is something that young people might be interested in doing, but they have to have the training, they have to have the capital to get established, and then they have to be assured that they have the market. That's the main thing that kills a lot of initiative here in agriculture and in other productive areas, because the market is so volatile or fickle. Today it's there. I mean, I always remember and relate the story that one day we were walking in Diamonds and we were talking to some arrowroot is on my mind. We were talking to some ginger farmers, people who had grown ginger, and had these big bags and they're washing them and stuffing them and so on. So I was intrigued and I asked them, I said, well, how long you been doing this for today? And they said, so many hours and so on. So I said, well, how much do you get for a pound? She said, well, 75 cents a pound. So I said, you can make a living on that? She said, well, you can't make money on $75 a pound. So I said, well, why did you plant it? And she said, well, when they planted, it was $1.50 a pound. You don't make a lot, but you can make something on $1.50 a pound. So what happens between the time of planting and the time of reaping? They are made essentially to carry the entire loss themselves. That is very discouraging for farmers who get into any area. And you hear in the cocoa industry, for example, they've been encouraging people to go into cocoa. But again, it's a tree crop. It takes a while, and people they're watching and seeing to see if this is really going to pan out. And it's a rational economic decision, but at the same time, it kind of inhibits the development of those industries.
Okay, my next question is very personal.
Mm-hmm.
I am now 18 years old,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this implies that I am now eligible to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I just like to know that how would you come about motivating myself and my peers to vote for your party? Because all my life I've been living underneath the ULP government. So
Mhm.
how would you motivate me to vote?
Well, the
for
fact
you?
that you're asking the question tells me that you're a person with an open mind. You're making your own decision on your own. That's commendable. And I don't want you to feel that somehow, that the New Democratic Party, is, going to be the what shall I say? Let me go to it another way. The New Democratic Party, what we would like to do for young people in this country is really to transform the economy so that they will have an opportunity to stay here. We have to also appeal to young people in a way that makes them feel that they're part of the process, you know, that they make decisions as well. So that has to be reflected in the way in which you govern. They have to be included in decision making. That is something that we have. You check our manifesto. I would invite you to read it. That we have encouraged young people to become a part of our organization, to be able to help to shape the policies going forward. This happens at the grassroots level, and we have the Young Democrats. If you know anybody in that organization, you can speak to them. But for us, as a level of government, for me as a prime minister of the country, as in a New Democratic Party administration, what we would wish to tell young people is that this is their country and that they have a chance to shape the future and to give them a role to do so in the halls of power, not just when election time comes, you throw a party and you ask them to come to the beach to have a jump up, which is what tends to happen. Now, some people say the NDP is always too serious and so on and so forth. Maybe, you know, we are, in terms of the style that you want, it may not be one that was necessarily the entertainment kind of politics, but I think that is somewhat demeaning to young people, you know, to treat them as if somehow they are only involved in entertainment. I don't think that is the case. Naturally, we have to provide some ways to attract the people to come to our party. But I want you to look at our policies and you will see that they are really geared towards giving young people a stake in the economy, giving young people a stake in the decision making in the country, and to be open to dialogue. I did it some time ago where I invited young people to come and talk with me down at French's house. It was a very interesting and eye-opening experience. And my point was to say to them that I'm accessible to them. I had a meeting last night with some young people from the United States, you know, and they were talking to me. They had come here in a cultural exchange, and they were talking to me and so on. And one of the young fellas came afterwards. He said, you know, this is so wonderful because you're so accessible. I can't even talk to my mayor where I come from. And I said, well, this is the way. I didn't tell him because he doesn't vote here, but I'll tell you that I will be accessible as well. And my ministers, the members of parliament, the candidates, they will be accessible to young people, and they will protect young people. One of the things that we have going on in this country here is the exploitation of young people like yourself. The exploitation of young people. That has to end, because you have to have confidence that when you speak to people in positions of authority, that when they respond basically to help you to solve your problems, to help you to do things better, to make your life better, not for their own self-interest. You know, I promise you that. And that is something I want you to tell your colleagues, and to ask them to look. Sometimes people presume to know what the NDP is about, and they haven't really taken the chance to look, you know. And I want you to take a chance to look and keep an open mind. And I hope that we will persuade you to be a part of it.
Thank you very much, Mr.
You're
Brady.
welcome.
All right, thank you very much. I'll make sure I get you a copy of the manifesto before you leave. If there are no more questions, let me say thank you very much to the members of the media who turned up today. Thank you very much to the leader of the opposition and president of the New Democratic Party, Dr. Godwin Friday. Thank you very much to Senator Bds for weighing in on some of the issues too as well. At this point in time, we'll now take you back over to our listeners on Nice Radio. Let me say thank you very much for those of you who tuned in and listened locally, regionally, and in the diaspora. Thank you very much. And we don't, take you back to Nice Radio.